It wasn't Biden. It wasn't Kamala. It wasn't even Schiff or AOC. The first blow in this week's political earthquake came from someone who once stood center stage at MAGA rallies, shook hands with Trump, and called government spending a cancer. That's right. Elon Musk just turned on the very party that helped elevate him into untouchable status. In a tweet that hit harder than any filibuster or floor speech this year, Musk declared, "Call your senator. Call your congressman. Bankrupting America is not okay. Kill the bill." And in that one line, he didn't just betray the GOP's latest budget deal. He declared war on the machine that protected him for years. You'd think someone that rich would know better than to bite the hand that signs the contracts. But maybe that's exactly what this was about. Contracts. Because behind the moral grandstanding and talk of deficits lies something a whole lot simpler. Money, power, and the illusion of principle. Which raises the real question. Was Elon betrayed by the system, or is he just mad it no longer serves him? The hearing was called with no warning. Cameras rolled, reporters scrambled, and in the center seat, flanked by lawyers and lobbyists, Elon Musk sat like a man unbothered. Because why wouldn't he be? He'd played this game before. Only this time, someone wasn't buying the act. Chair Mike Johnson's face was pale, the confidence gone from his voice. No one sitting on this side of the aisle thought a man who used to sit at this table, Johnson began, would be the one to stab it in the back right before the vote. It wasn't a political statement. It was a confession of shock. The kind of sentence that only gets said when the betrayal feels personal. Jasmine Crockett stood up slowly. No theatrics, no binder thumping, just a calm, cutting stare, and one sentence. "I'm not surprised you turned on them. I'm surprised it took this long." The room went still. Even Musk, so used to commanding attention, tilted his head slightly as if not expecting her to skip the applause lines. Then came his answer. Measured, arrogant, practiced. "I wasn't elected to clap for failing budgets. I don't sell my conscience to keep a seat warm for the party." One of the GOP members muttered under his breath, "You never had a seat," but didn't dare raise his voice. Crockett didn't miss a beat. Exactly. And you've never had to audit your own spending. It wasn't a zinger, it was a scalpel. And for a man like Elon, who's made a career out of being smarter than the room, that line cut deeper than the headlines ever could. All eyes turned to Johnson. His hands were shaking as he gripped the gavel. Not from anger, from knowing that the man they once called our secret weapon was now testifying under oath, and not as a hero, but as a target. So what happened between the closed-door strategy calls and this very public political knife fight? Why did Elon snap now, and why with this bill, this moment? Was it principle or profit? And more importantly, how long has he been planning this move? Because if you think this is just another rich guy with opinions, you're not paying attention. This isn't about ideology anymore. It's about exposure. It's about leverage. And it's about what happens when the man behind the curtain realizes the stage is slipping out from under him. And that is where our story begins. And just like that, the man who spent a decade selling himself as the savior of American innovation transformed, before a live congressional audience, into what can only be described as a glorified tax credit lobbyist in a designer suit. Elon Musk, the tech messiah, the iconoclast billionaire, the man who once tweeted that bureaucracy was a cancer, now stood clutching talking points that might as well have been Xeroxed from a Tesla investor call. With the solemnity of a preacher and the smugness of someone too rich to be corrected, he declared the reconciliation bill a boulder tied to the neck of innovation. Translation. His industry's perks were on the chopping block, and suddenly, fiscal conservatism became oppression. He rattled off the offenses: the 7,500 EV tax credit set to expire in 2026, the $250 annual EV fee, and the end of credits for used electric vehicles. And then, unable to help himself, he launched into one of the most unintentionally comedic pivot attempts in recent hearing memory. Representative Crockett supported lithium deals with China. So tell me, who's enriching the enemy? It was a swing, a wild theatrical one, and to be fair, it earned a raised eyebrow or two from the peanut gallery on the right. But Crockett wasn't blinking. She didn't even flinch. She simply opened a folder like a substitute teacher who already knows which kid cheated on the test. 48 hours before your tweet, she began, her voice level, Tesla hosted a closed-door meeting with internal analysts titled, wait for it, Projected EV Credit Loss Impact, $2.4 billion. Elon leaned forward. I didn't attend that meeting. Smooth. If only he hadn't already left fingerprints on slide 6. But you reviewed it, Crockett said, almost gently. And you signed it. Then came the moment you could feel in your stomach. On the giant screen behind her, a grainy image of the slide came into focus. Bold red text across the top read, Mitigation Strategy. Kill the bill before vote date. Target 3. Key GOP figures. Underneath it, Musk's unmistakable signature. The room didn't gasp, it exhaled hard. Mike Johnson's face turned the color of overcooked oatmeal. A GOP aide typed furiously into his phone. Get legal to review NDA breach risk. And just like that, the story Elon wanted to tell. Of principle, of patriotic objection, of defending American innovation from government overreach, collapsed into something far more predictable. Not rebellion, not ideology, just panic about a $2.4 billion problem becoming public before earnings call season. So the real question wasn't why Elon turned on the bill. It was why he thought no one would notice him doing it with the subtlety of a fire truck in a cathedral. Because if this hearing had started with tension, it now pulsed with something worse. Realization. The committee had caught a man not fighting for innovation, but for himself. And next they'd ask, who else knew? But of course, the golden rule in any political scandal is simple. When caught red-handed, throw red paint on your opponent and pretend it's a crime scene. And Elon, bless his heart, took the strategy straight from the Beltway playbook. Cornered by a digital slide bearing his own signature, he lunged at Jasmine Crockett with the kind of personal attack that usually comes wrapped in bad cologne and Fox Business sound bites. She talks about justice, he said, voice steadier than it should have been. But last year she opposed an audit into renewable energy programs after a data breach. Was it because Tesla didn't get the software contract? Cue the soft gasp from the press pit. Less shock, more theatrical obligation. Crockett didn't even blink. She responded with surgical calm. I didn't vote against the audit. I voted to delay it. And today, I'm not delaying you. It was clean, lethal, and delivered without flinching. Musk straightened in his seat, leaned in and muttered the kind of comeback that usually precedes a crash and burn. I'm not someone who scares easy. To which Crockett replied, Good. I'm not threatening you. I'm just reading your signature. And read it she did. But not before turning the page and the tables. With a flick of the screen, she revealed the next act in the slow-motion unraveling of the Musk myth. Elon's tenure on the Doge Commission, where he famously promised to cut $2 trillion in wasteful spending. Spoiler, he didn't. What he did cut, however, was astonishingly well aligned with agencies that had the audacity to look under the hood of his empire. The list was projected in block letters: CFPB, the ones who track consumer complaints, especially the ones about Teslas that break into trees; USAID flagged Starlink for unauthorized data routing in foreign zones; EPA questioned emissions data at the Fremont plant; NLRB, pesky little habit of siding with Tesla employees trying to unionize; DOT and USDA, both with open cases tied to safety compliance and subsidies. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't need to. She read each agency, each investigation, each funding cut like she was listing symptoms on a medical chart. And every diagnosis led to the same disease: Elon's wallet. Musk, for his part, offered the kind of defense only the overly confident or overly cornered could believe. I cut waste, nothing more. That would have sounded better if waste didn't mean every federal body that dared to whisper the words regulatory oversight. The room was quiet, too quiet. And then, in the third row, a Republican lawmaker scribbled something onto a notepad, folded the paper, and passed it to a staffer. The camera caught just enough of it. Check if defense contract exemptions still valid under Elon's review authority. In a hearing that had already exposed billion-dollar favoritism and data-driven manipulation, the phrase defense contract exemption wasn't just bureaucratic. It was radioactive. Because when the cuts always hit your critics and the cash always lands in your column, sooner or later, someone's going to ask whether this is budget policy or corporate sabotage dressed up in a navy blazer. And from the look on Crockett's face, that question wasn't far behind. And just when you thought the air in the hearing room couldn't get any thicker, Jasmine Crockett did what only the truly prepared and mildly sadistic can do in a moment of peak tension. She smiled. Not wide, not smug. Just enough to let everyone know she was holding the matchbook while Elon Musk was standing in a puddle of gasoline labeled Federal Oversight. She tilted her head and delivered the line like a surgeon choosing her scalpel. You say you cut waste. Then let's look at what you threw out with the trash. And there it was, projected on the giant committee screen like a bureaucratic mugshot lineup. CFPB just so happened to be processing complaints about Autopilot's penchant for confusing pedestrians with crosswalk paint. USAID mid-probe into suspicious international bandwidth allocation tied to Starlink. NLRB investigating Tesla's definition of worker rights, which apparently includes mandatory anti-union videos during bathroom breaks. EPA caught Musk's Texas plant turning emissions reports into fan fiction. Elon, for his part, feigned calm with the forced nonchalance of a man auditioning for his own biopic. No agency was banned from investigating. They just needed budget rationalization, he said, like a CEO trying to convince shareholders that firing the entire compliance team was actually a lean-forward innovation strategy. Crockett didn't blink. The government isn't one of your startups, she snapped, and rationalization doesn't mean erasure. The sentence landed hard. Musk's jaw tightened. He tried to pivot. I didn't personally order any cuts. That's not how Doge operates. Wrong answer. She held up a document like it was Exhibit A in a corruption trial, which, frankly, wasn't far off. Then maybe you can explain this. The screen lit up again. A memo from Doge, handwritten notes clearly visible. Deprioritize enforcement actions involving Musk-related holdings. Overexposure risk. There it was. The holy grail of bureaucratic cowardice. A directive that said, in so many words, he's too big to touch, so don't. Elon's expression didn't change. He just blinked a little slower. The GOP side of the room shifted uncomfortably. Then came the kill shot. Crockett, almost casually, queued up one last file. This time, video. Grainy footage from a closed-door Doge meeting. A senior official, calm, deliberate, off guard, saying the quiet part out loud. We shouldn't touch agencies investigating Tesla or SpaceX. Elon is too exposed. It would sink the bill. Silence. Not a dramatic silence. A calculating one. The kind where every elected official in the room started mentally scanning their own call logs and committee votes. A Republican lawmaker leaned in toward a staffer and whispered, "Cancel the 3:30 meeting. This just turned into something else." And that's the thing about cutting oversight. When you finally get caught, you better hope the people you buried don't come back to testify. Because Crockett wasn't done. Not even close. Cue the righteous outrage. Right on schedule, a Republican stalwart rose like a middle school vice principal trying to cancel a food fight. Enough. We didn't convene this hearing to execute Elon Musk in public. This is a witch hunt. The room paused, not because of the substance of the claim, but because, ironically, the only thing missing was a broomstick and a full moon. You could practically hear the stage directions. Insert defensive monologue from loyal Musk defender here. But Jasmine Crockett, unbothered and unscripted, leaned slightly forward and deadpanned. I didn't light the fire. I just traced the gasoline trail he left behind. The silence that followed was brutal, not because it was loud, but because it was earned. Elon, seizing the cue like a CEO spotting a trending hashtag, straightened his jacket and delivered the kind of line that would look great on a bumper sticker or a Fox Chiron. Exactly. I'm here because I had the courage to speak the truth. If Representative Crockett wants to paint me as a traitor, I accept it, because taxpayers deserve someone willing to stand up. For a second, the tide almost turned. There were head nods, a few murmurs. Somewhere in the back, a staffer might have started drafting a tweet. But then came Crockett's interjection, calm, surgical, and designed to gut the entire moment. And while you were standing up, how much did you make? The screen behind her didn't roar. It whispered numbers. Cold, hard, traceable numbers. $560 million from the Treasury Department to SpaceX. $5.9 billion from the Department of Defense for national security launch programs. $38.8 million from NASA, because apparently even rocket science comes with loyalty points. And, of course, the crown jewel, the $25 billion Golden Dome project, where Elon's company wasn't just a bidder, it was the presumptive winner. Elon didn't blink. I didn't ask. They chose me because I'm the best. It was the kind of retort that sounds good in a documentary narrated by Morgan Freeman, but crashes hard under the weight of context. Crockett's reply, ice cold and flame hot all at once. They chose you because anyone who would have challenged you is already gone. There it was. The unspoken truth, now spoken with surgical precision. Elon hadn't won the game. He'd helped rewrite the rules. Every contract, every exemption, every vanished oversight office. They weren't rewards for brilliance. They were insurance policies paid in silence. And as Crockett's gaze locked onto Musk's, the question became less about what he took and more about who let him, which, unfortunately for the room, was a question about to be answered. And then came the part of the story that always stings the most, the one where national security gets used like a fire blanket to smother accountability. Jasmine Crockett, still unflinching, now turned her attention to the most radioactive file on the table, the $25 billion Golden Dome project. "Let's talk about this missile defense contract," she said, voice sharp enough to cut titanium. A single vendor bid, funded by the Department of Defense, not 1 cent of which was flagged by Doge under your oversight. Why is that? The room didn't move. Crockett didn't blink. Then came the knife twist. You claim to fight waste, and yet the Pentagon, arguably the most unauditable agency in government, somehow escapes your scissors? Elon paused, not out of respect, out of calculation. He knew this wasn't a tech demo or a TED Talk. This was a deposition in all but name. After a few silent beats, he delivered the kind of sentence that plays better on cable news than in front of a committee. National security doesn't come cheap. I won't apologize for protecting America. A noble soundbite. If only it didn't come gift-wrapped in monopoly contracts and classified carve-outs. Crockett didn't flinch. She just raised an eyebrow and volleyed back. You're protecting America by jacking the price and eliminating competition? The GOP side of the room went still. Somewhere, a throat cleared. The illusion that this was just politics as usual began to fracture. Then, calmly, Crockett reached for a file and pulled out something no Silicon Valley PR team could spin. A leaked fax from the Pentagon, stamped confidential. The quote, now enlarged on screen, felt like a grenade with the pin pulled, exempted from audit under NSSL directive due to national partnership necessity. But the real explosion came from the fine print. Musk DoD Direct Liaison, signed Q1 FY25. There it was, the quiet arrangement behind the curtain. While agencies got gutted for merely filing questions about Tesla or Starlink, the Department of Defense, home to $700 hammers and missing billions, had become Elon's personal ATM, sealed off from scrutiny with a signature and a euphemism. As the screen glowed in silence, a female GOP lawmaker in the back row clenched her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. The camera zoomed in. No one said a word. Crockett looked back at Elon and dropped the hammer. They exempted you from audits, and in return, you exempted yourself from ethics. No rebuttal, no counterattack. Because when the receipts are stamped by the Pentagon, even Elon Musk doesn't get to tweet his way out. And just beneath the surface, a new tension began to rise. If the military had gone silent on Musk, who else had been told to look the other way? There are silences that soothe, and then there are silences that split. The kind that don't fall over a room. They crawl across it, exposing everything that was already cracking beneath the surface. After the Pentagon audit exemption was aired like a dirty bedsheet, the hearing didn't explode. It sank. Slowly, deliberately, like a ship that knew the iceberg had been hit long before the passengers did. Gone were the smirks, the loyal nods, the performative coughs of committee theater. In their place, a vacuum of trust. And right in the center of it, Elon Musk, still seated, still unmoved, still believing the rules of gravity didn't apply to him. But gravity, it turns out, speaks fluent subpoena. Musk leaned forward, breaking the silence with a line that reeked of wounded genius. If I'm the problem, then maybe look at who signed the contracts. Don't hang this on the guy building the technology. It was vintage Musk, part martyr, part messiah, all misdirection. Mike Johnson responded, voice low and flat, like a man trying not to bleed publicly. No one here is assigning blame, but what's on the table must be understood. He didn't look at Elon. He didn't look at Crockett. He looked down at the table, at the papers, at the crumbling architecture of denial that had kept the GOP and Musk in a silent, mutually beneficial orbit. That's when Crockett stepped forward. No raised voice, No grandstanding, just a document, printed, signed, and placed directly in front of the man who claimed to hate bureaucracy, but made damn sure it served him. You signed it. They signed it. But it was you who requested the audit exemption clause. Elon exhaled like a man preparing a story that had been rehearsed far too many times in front of a bathroom mirror. He turned to the camera, not the committee, not the chair, the camera, and said with just enough tremble to sound theatrical, "I signed because I believe there are forces trying to sabotage from within. There are things I know, things I've never been allowed to say." And just like that, we were no longer in a hearing. We were in a conspiracy podcast. Then came the twist, quick, clinical, and delivered not by a voice, but a screen. A committee aide, eyes wide, stepped in from stage left with a tablet in hand. On it, a breaking chyron from CNN. The text was merciless. Breaking. GOP congressman calls on DOD to freeze all pending contracts with SpaceX, pending conclusion of oversight hearing. The bottom banner followed fast and brutal. Internal rebellion escalates. Musk no longer untouchable. The camera caught it all. Elon's jaw tightening, a staffer reaching to mute a buzzing phone, a Republican lawmaker turning slightly in his chair to create distance that just days ago would have been unthinkable. The myth of the invincible innovator hadn't just cracked, it was beginning to leak. And if the rebellion had already reached the Pentagon, the only question left was, who would break ranks next? With the myth of invincibility cracked and the room turning colder by the minute, Elon Musk reached for the oldest defense in the billionaire playbook: moral martyrdom. Gone was the combative disruptor. In his place stood a man cloaked in self-pity and selective sacrifice, eager to remind the room that no one had suffered like he had. "I've sacrificed more than anyone in this room," he declared, voice thick with theatrical gravity. "I gave up reputation, personal safety, even my social media platform, just to tell the truth. It was a performance, no doubt, somewhere between a tech summit keynote and a TED Talk in a bunker." But Crockett didn't interrupt. She let him run. Because sometimes when a man is digging his own grave, the most gracious thing you can do is hand him a sharper shovel. When he finally finished, she gently closed her folder and replied, not with fire, but with frost. "You traded your reputation, sure, but the one thing you never let go of was monopoly." And then she dropped the real payload. No accusation, just playback. A video clip from an internal SpaceX presentation, Elon speaking to his team about the $25 billion Golden Dome project. On screen, he stood in front of a gleaming backdrop of satellites and military insignias, his voice crisp and proud. "Once we lock the 25B package, no one's touching EV subsidies again. They'll need us to keep the sky clean." The phrase hit like a bullet dipped in brass. Elon scrambled. That was internal context. I was speaking about national security. Crockett barely blinked. "No, you were talking about turning innovation into ransom." From the press bench, a reporter, unable to contain himself, muttered just loud enough for his mic to pick up. "He sounds like the CEO of the White House." The line wasn't meant for drama. It was just accurate. The camera turned to a senior GOP lawmaker, once a loyal Musk ally, now scribbling a line in his notebook with the slow resignation of someone realizing they'd backed the wrong titan. The page read, "If only we'd known what he'd do with the power." The damage, by this point, was no longer theoretical. Elon hadn't just amassed leverage. He'd learned how to weaponize it. And as Crockett prepared her next move, the only question was how many in the room still thought they were playing the same game. Because clearly, Musk had rewritten the rules, and maybe the scoreboard too. By this point, no one in the chamber was pretending anymore. Not the staffers, not the lawmakers, and certainly not Elon Musk. Whatever performance he had staged at the start had long since collapsed under the weight of facts, signatures, and his own recorded voice. Jasmine Crockett rose, not with drama, but with precision. Her eyes didn't scan the committee. They locked on the camera, the American public, because the message wasn't for those in the room anymore. "We used to call you a pioneer," she said, voice clear, unflinching. "But you're not a pioneer now. You're the central distribution point for federal dollars, exempt from audits, gifted priority contracts, and shielded from legal scrutiny." For the first time all day, Elon didn't respond. No snark, no counterspin, no attempt to grab the narrative and throttle it back into submission. Just silence. His knuckles tightened around the armrest, the telltale grip of a man who realized there was no line left to cross, because he'd already redrawn the map. Crockett let the silence breathe, then cut through it. A truly fair system doesn't have to hide anything. So if the U.S. government has to cover for one man, then who exactly is running whom? It was a line that didn't just sting, it lingered. A sentence designed not to be answered, but to echo. And somewhere in the back of the room, it landed harder than anyone expected. A DOJ investigator, never introduced, never announced, sat still, expression unreadable. But a reporter in the gallery caught just enough. The agent pulled out his phone, raised it, and took a photo of the slide on screen, the one labeled Pentagon Exemption. Nothing dramatic, just one frame, enough to say this wasn't over. Meanwhile, a national security advisor seated behind the GOP bench leaned sideways, whispering with the weary tone of someone recalculating everything. "We might lose Musk, but we can still save the system." That single line, unofficial, unrecorded, and deeply revealing, was more damning than any vote tally. Because it said the quiet part out loud. Elon Musk wasn't just too big to fail, he'd become too embarrassing to keep. And as the hearing neared its end, one truth was already unavoidable. Washington might have let him build the fortress, but it was finally deciding whether to tear down the walls. No gavel struck, no declaration made, no applause permitted. Jasmine Crockett stepped down from the witness podium with the silence of someone who didn't need to say, "I told you so," because every word she'd spoken was still hanging in the air like smoke from a courtroom fire. She didn't raise a fist. She didn't turn for the cameras. She didn't have to. The silence trailing her carried more weight than 1,000 closing statements. Elon Musk, meanwhile, remained seated, no longer the architect of the moment, but its artifact. The once sympathetic GOP bench around him had thinned into something more dangerous than opposition: distance. No one reached for him. No one walked beside him. And, perhaps worst of all for a man so addicted to narrative, no one came to spin. Outside the hearing room, the reporters weren't hounding Musk. They were gathered in tight knots around a packet, now making the rounds like a political obituary. At the top of the leak, bold as a headline, "Audit Revival Request, Golden Dome, NSSL, SpaceX, Full Review Proposed." Not suggested. Not considered. Proposed. And then, as if Capitol Hill had decided the cleanup should start before the cameras cut, another figure darted past the lens, an aide gripping a folder stamped in all caps. Suggested referral. DOJ Conflict of Interest Investigation. The walls weren't just cracking, they were reclassified. But it was the final image that sealed it. not inside the halls of power, but beyond them. Just outside the Capitol steps, under a sky no longer filtered through press briefings and lobbyist scripts, stood a man in an oil-streaked jacket, one of the nameless workers whose sweat had built the EV empire, now leveraged like a battering ram. He held a cardboard sign. Nothing fancy, nothing branded, just truth written in Sharpie. You sold us the future, then bought it back for yourself. The camera didn't cut away. It lingered, almost unsure whether to zoom in or bow out, and then it simply faded to black. No soundtrack, no recap, no voiceover tying it up with a patriotic ribbon, because when the sun finally stops shining for one man alone, the silence says enough.